The bulb above me hummed like a trapped fly, a small sun nailed to the joists while the basement swallowed every echo. The door had two bolts, one polite and one proud, both convinced they were guardians of order. They call this a rest, a pause, a place to cool off. But pauses do not click twice and walk away. I sat on the concrete step and let the chill travel through my wrists until the pulse steadied. Above me, chairs scraped and a laugh arrived too early, as if victory had already been signed. My pocket disagreed. Folded twice along the old crease was the original grant deed. Corners softened by years of touching, clipped to a certified copy with a recorder's seal and index number stamped in blue. Paper does not boast, but it remembers, and memory is louder than a locked door. I ran my thumb along the edge and felt the textured circle of the seal, the quiet bravery of ink that knows dates. They wanted speed. I carried sequence. They wanted my signature. I carried the chain that made theirs irrelevant. Above, someone said, "Monday the bank releases," as if Monday took orders. The basement smelled of old soap and damp wood, the kind of scent that clings to stations where people wait to be told who they are. They had moved my room temporarily, boxed my books, reassigned the mailbox key, and begun speaking about the house as if it were theirs to arrange. Erasure rarely announces itself. Hey, tidies. I traced a hairline crack in the stair and remembered the day we carried the first chair down, laughing at how it would never fit, and then it did. Laughter can lift. Tonight there's pressed down. A footstep paused outside. A plate slid in, square sandwich level water. Performance prefers symmetry. Truth travels in margins. I thanked the wood, not the hand, because wood carries sound further. I kept the deed and certified copy beneath my palm, a second spine, and pictured the recorder's page where the index leads to my name. If morning came clean, I would dial the number that begins with the county prefix and speak the index out loud. If morning stalled, the seal itself would speak. Upstairs, someone rehearsed gratitude for a future they planned to fund with my absence, and the house answered with a settling sigh. Noise claimed certainty. Silence counted bolts. I did not rattle them. I pressed my back to the step, held the documents like warmth, and let the night measure itself against my breath. This was not where the story started, only where it stepped into the light. Now we go upstairs again. Rewind to the week before the lock and the hum, when Erasure arrived dressed as help and every kindness came with a ledger. They called it reorganizing the house, a fresh start. I called it misplacing a life, one drawer at a time. A new chore chart appeared on the fridge with my name faded to initials, while the spare keys vanished into someone else's pocket. Their voices got louder about efficiency. My rooms got quieter about belonging. The mailbox told the truth first. A utilities statement arrived addressed CO my daughter-in-law. Same account number, new authorized contact line, printed neat as a verdict. They said it was temporary, just streamlining. I held the envelope up to the window and watched my name fall out of the watermark. Their speed redrew categories. My receipts remembered dates. In the hallway. The mirror shifted 2 inches left and made the family photo look like it was apologizing. My bookshelf disappeared into labeled totes, while the guest mattress found its way to the basement with a bright throw tossed over like a bandage. They called it staging for contractors. I called it moving the borders in a quiet war. Their plans used floor plans and timelines. My memory used paint drips along the baseboard. Downstairs they installed a lock for safety, then left the window screws hand tight, a kindness that squeaked. Upstairs they set new coasters and poured drinks around a contractor's estimate while I rinsed a single cup and listened to the house choose sides. Safety spoke in hardware. Belonging spoke in where the water dries on the rack. Their noise rehearsed outcomes. My silence drafted contingencies. I tried to name the moment I slipped from wife to guest. But erasure is gradual, like a picture fading in a sunny room. The pantry labels changed first, then the calendar, then the way voices paused when I entered and resumed when I turned away. They said I needed rest. I said I needed a room with a door that opened from the inside. Their graciousness arranged chairs. My legs memorized the stairs. On the third evening, a text arrived asking for my driver's license for the file, and a printed email lay on the counter titled, "Change of authority," with a blank where my name used to sit. I did not argue. I opened the hall console, pressed 2 fingers to the sticky wood, and felt it catch like it always had. They celebrated a timeline. I checked the grain for a hinge. Their certainty stacked folders. My certainty reached for the drawer that never learned to be quiet. That stubborn drawer held the envelope that changed everything. Waiting exactly where memory pointed home, I found it in the drawer that never learned to glide, the one that stuck halfway like a gate deciding who belonged. Inside lay the envelope I had felt beneath the grain, thick paper that remembered the weight of a hand. I slid the flap with my thumbnail and breathed in the dry scent of storage, dust and ink and time. On top was the grant deed cream stock, our names written in a steady clerk's hand. And behind it, the certified copy with the recorder's seal impressed so deep the circle caught the light. Dates are honest when people are not. Tucked with it was a narrow memorandum. Patrick drafted the year the steps began to tire him. A life estate acknowledgement he insisted we notarize just in case. The ink had thinned where his pen hesitated, but the language was clear enough to stand on its own feet. The notary's stamp bled slightly at the edges, a tiny sun over a name I could still picture at the counter downtown. Their voices upstairs had spoken of equity and lines of credit. The page in my hand spoke of residence and right of use. They wanted leverage. I held occupancy that survived signatures behind the memo. A clipped receipt bore the recorder's book and page, instrument number, timestamp, and the initials of a clerk who never once mispronounced my name. I traced the raised seal with my thumb until the heat of my hand warmed the paper and the circle felt alive again. The county website could pull the same index without a password. Even a borrowed phone would do. Their plans like to travel by whisper. Records prefer open doors. I copied the numbers onto a sticky note and tucked it in my wallet. Because memory can be firm until a stare decides otherwise. There was a photocopy, a draft update someone had forgotten to remove from the stack. Language about streamlining title that replaced names with roles and slipped past me like a stranger wearing my sweater. The date in the footer had a Sunday stamp, and the font sat wrong in the line, taller than the letters around it, like a child on a borrowed chair. If forgery is a shout, sloppiness is a whisper. Both are heard by paper. They wanted to call the printer final. I called the recorder's office morning. I made 3 sets without drama, 1 for the kitchen file marked home, 1 sealed in a manila sleeve under my sweater drawer, and 1 scanned to my cloud folder labeled House Story with the index number in the title. I do not argue with storms. I label umbrellas. The scanner's light moved like a tide across the glass while upstairs someone practiced certainty. They rehearsed a timeline. I documented a lineage. When the last page finished, I slipped the originals into my cardigan pocket, then quietly set the sticky note by the phone that night. In the morning, I would call Daniel. He arrived without fuss, the way good weather does, and set his briefcase down as if the table were a witness. He read the grant deed first, then the certified copy, then the sticky note with the instrument number, lips moving once to match the digits. He opened his laptop, typed the county URL from memory, and pulled the grantor-grantee index without asking me to spell my name. "Chain is clean," he said, printing the page so the ink would dry under his hand. No gaps, no clouds, no surprises. He lifted the update packet they had left on the counter and tapped the footer. But this date lives on a Sunday. He turned the signature page to the notary seal and read the commission number aloud. While my family rehearsed efficiency, Daniel looked up the notary registry and frowned. Different name. Expired last spring. He circled 2 things on the index printout: the original instrument number of my deed and the file ID on their draft. Writing them side by side as if introducing people who should never meet. "We'll order fresh certified copies," he said, "and lodge a courtesy notation with the recorder that a protective motion is imminent." He photographed my certified copy and emailed himself the image with the subject line, "House chain intact," then placed each paper back where he had found it. The old-fashioned courtesy that says, "I see you," and I will not make you search twice. He took a yellow pad and made a short list in a tidy column. Certified copies. Quarter note, draft declaration. Proposed order, judge on duty, service plan. Will file for a temporary restraining order to preserve title no sale. No refinance, no transfer pending a hearing. This is not a fight, he added. It is a pause with a stamp. Their plan had run on applause. Ours would run on paper and air. Do not confront, he said. Do not announce. Photograph rooms as you find them. Keep the originals on you. For now, zip envelope, cardigan pocket. No bedside tables. He slid a spare envelope across the table, plastic with a zipper that sounded like a line being drawn. If anyone asks for copies, say the recorder has them, and give them the instrument number. I watched the light move across his glasses and felt the house relax a fraction. Like a spine that remembered how to stand, he checked his watch and nodded. I'll draft tonight and be at the courthouse early. If all goes well, we'll have a signature by afternoon. Their Monday had believed it owned the week. Our Friday would learn how to stop it. The call came at 7:30 the next morning, Daniel's voice steady as morning coffee, carrying the weight of signed papers. It's done, he said. Judge Holbrook granted the temporary restraining order at 6:55. No sale, no refinance, no transfer of title until the hearing, while they slept late on Friday morning confidence. The courthouse clock tower had already chosen sides. Their Monday bank appointment would meet a stamped piece of paper with a cause number and the seal of KOF. Someone who outranked checkbooks. My cardigan pocket grew heavier with the certified copy. By afternoon, the order sat in a manila envelope beside the sugar bowl. Unaddressed, but not anonymous. The kind of quiet that hums before it sings. Daniel had included a cover note typed in his careful font. Temporary restraining order. Case No. CV 2020-4008834. Issued pursuant to probable cause of defective title transfer. Effective immediately. Legal language sounds like armor when it fits properly. Their weekend plans would discover. Monday wore a different color now. I folded laundry in the basement while they made phone calls upstairs. Voices pitched a note higher than yesterday. The kind of urgency that arrives when schedules meet reality. Through the vent. I heard postponed in complication and a long pause where someone learned the word restraining applied to more than behavior. The contractor's truck that was supposed to arrive Monday would find a driveway that remembered who paid for it. Their confidence had called in reinforcements. My receipts had called in the judge. The evening brought a dinner invitation hand-delivered with unusual formality, cream cardstock that matched their new tone. Family update meeting, Saturday, 6 p.m., dining room. Light refreshments. They had discovered courtesy the way people discover umbrellas when rain starts. I accepted with a nod and set the invitation beside the court order, to pieces of paper that would soon learn to speak the same language. Their urgency wore mascara. My patients wore sensible shoes. That night, I walked through the house, room by room, noting which photographs had shifted and which corners held new shadows. The tape measure lived in the junk drawer. The camera lived in my phone. If questions arrived wearing judges' robes, I would answer with dimensions and timestamps and the steady voice of someone who had measured twice before anyone else started cutting. Their performance scheduled itself for tomorrow. My evidence had already dressed for court. The next step would be dinner conversation with a court order listening from the counter. And I suspected Saturday would teach us both which appetite was stronger. They served soup in the good bowls, the ones reserved for company, and set my place with a linen napkin folded like an apology. The dining room smelled of candles and rehearsed warmth, the kind of atmosphere that arrives when performance meets necessity. Their smiles stretched a little too wide while the conversation stayed a little too safe, circling in tension like water around a drain. I sat with my hands on my lap and let them speak first, because urgency always announces itself before strategy catches up between the salad and the main course. The truth began to slip through the cracks. The bank said once the title updates, we can access the line immediately, my son mentioned, cutting his chicken with medical precision. His wife nodded, adding, The contractor starts Monday, if everything clears. They spoke over each other's edges, finishing sentences like a choir that had practiced harmony without learning the song. I held my soup spoon steady and asked who their notary was, because Saturday evening seemed an unusual time to discuss business. The silence lasted exactly 3 heartbeats before someone changed the subject to weather, but I had already counted the tells. A glance toward the kitchen where paperwork lived, a pause before answering. And the way my daughter-in-law's fork found her plate twice without picking up food? Their confidence had called a meeting. My question had called their bluff. I pulled my phone from my pocket and set it beside my water glass, screen up. County Recorder's website still open to the instrument search page. Technology does not argue. It simply displays. We want what's best for the family, they said. Voices layered like a closing statement, while I noted that offices close on weekends and notaries keep journals by law. Their timeline wanted speed. My timeline wanted timestamps. They poured wine and toasted new beginnings. While I wondered aloud which notary worked Sunday evenings and whether they kept appointment books, the candles flickered once and someone's laugh arrived a half-second late. The social equivalent of a misstep on a stair. I thanked them for dinner and complimented the napkins, then stood to clear my plate because courtesy travels both ways. While loading the dishwasher, I heard my name float through the kitchen doorway, attached to words like confused and paperwork and Monday appointment. They were already planning the conversation they would have without me, measuring their next moves against what they thought I knew. I dried my hands, adjusted my cardigan where the envelope made a small square in the pocket, and made my goodnight gracious and brief. Walking upstairs, I felt their eyes follow my path. The weight of watching that comes when people are calculating risk. Tomorrow would bring phone calls and scheduling adjustments. The administrative scramble of a plan meeting a court-stamped reality. I had learned what I came to learn. Their notary worked weekends, their timeline brooked no delays. And their courtesy had an expiration date that coincided with my signature. Monday arrived with subpoenas dressed in manila envelopes, each one carrying Daniel's careful script and the court's unblinking seal. The notary registry search had bloomed into a formal request. Journal pages for the weekend in question, office entry logs, and the complete file for the instrument they thought they had perfected. Their timeline had wanted speed. The discovery process wanted truth, and truth traveled with stamps and service dates that could not be negotiated. While they made phone calls to postpone, I made tea and listened to urgency meet accountability. By Wednesday, the journal pages arrived with a cover letter that made Daniel's mouth compress into a line. Principal not present. Sunday, 7:42 p.m. Witnessed per instructions, written in a careful hand that belonged to someone who knew what they were documenting. The notary commission had expired 6 weeks before the signature, a detail that lived in the state database but not in their planning. Their forgery wore a name. Our subpoena wore a badge. Daniel photographed each page against white paper, then emailed the images to an expert who specialized in timeline fraud. Facts have addresses. Lies have alibis. The office entry logs told their own story in swipe card, timestamps, and security footage metadata. The building showed empty that Sunday at 7:42 p.m. All keycard access records ending Friday evening and resuming Monday morning. Their witness signature happened in a room that was locked, notarized by someone whose commission was void, documented by someone who was not there. Daniel called it a hat trick of implausibility. I called it paper-trailed justice. Discovery is not an argument. It is an inventory. And their inventory was missing essential items. Then came the call that changed the mathematics entirely. Sarah Morrison, a former office assistant, had kept her own planner and agreed to speak under oath. She arrived Tuesday afternoon with a small spiral notebook, pages marked in blue ink, and the quiet certainty of someone who had seen too much and said too little for too long. I logged the calls, she said, opening to a page marked with a paperclip. Liquidate quietly, no delays. That was the exact phrase, 2 days before the document was signed. I wrote it down because it seemed wrong to rush when someone was grieving. Sarah's notes included phone numbers, dates, and a timeline that made their family care look like administrative choreography. She had witnessed signature sessions where principals weren't present, been asked to notarize documents after hours, and heard conversations about clearing obstacles that made her uncomfortable enough to keep records. I thought they were helping, she said. But helping doesn't usually involve so many Sunday meetings and sealed envelopes. Her planner was 3 inches thick with 2 years of careful notes. And Daniel's eyes lit up like someone who had found the last piece of a puzzle that made the picture clear. The metadata analysis came back Friday with findings that made Daniel whistle softly. Their PDF showed creation timestamps after business hours, fonts not used by the firm, and digital signatures applied from an IP address that traced to a residential location. The file had been assembled piecemeal, signed remotely, and backdated with software that left fingerprints in the code. Their perfect document was perfectly flawed, and the expert's report read like a technical obituary for amateur fraud. Digital paper kept better records than they had bargained for by the end of the week. Our file folder had grown thick enough to cast shadows. Subpoena responses, expert analyses, witness statements, and enough procedural violations to make a judge reach for reading glasses. They had wanted my signature. They had earned a hearing date and a docket number that would follow them longer than their weekend ambitions. The table was set for a conversation they had been trying to avoid since the first lock clicked into place. And this time, the dining room would be downtown with a gavel keeping time. The conference room at Henley, Marcus & Associates, was glass and marble politeness. It's the kind of space that charged by the hour for its silence. They had requested a neutral venue for what they called a family consultation, but neutrality felt different when your file folder was thicker than their confidence. I arrived with Daniel, each of us carrying one manila envelope, while they assembled like a committee: my son, his wife, their attorney, and a family advisor whose smile belonged to someone who got paid to smooth edges until they disappeared. Their side of the table held matching leather portfolios. Our side held paper that remembered dates. The family advisor opened with condolences and concern, words that arrived in the right order but with the wrong temperature. "We want to ensure everyone's interests are protected," he said, glancing at a note card before continuing, "and that Mrs. Sloan understands the complexities of estate's transitions." His voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to translating resistance into compliance. I folded my hands and waited because patience was the one asset they had never learned to price. Their opening gambit wanted cooperation. Mine wanted documentation. Daniel placed the first envelope in the center of the table without ceremony, then opened it to reveal the Notary Commission's search results, expired 6 weeks before their signature, stamped with the state seal that makes lies expensive. Their attorney picked up the page, read it twice, then set it down with the careful placement of someone who had just learned their client's timeline, lived in a different calendar. My son's wife reached for her water glass and found it empty. The advisor's pen stopped moving across his notepad. Facts have gravity. Their confidence was learning to fall. The second envelope yielded the office entry logs, security timestamps that made Sunday evening look remarkably vacant for a building that claimed to host urgent family business. 7:42 p.m. Daniel read aloud, "No keycard access. Building secured at 6:15 p.m. Friday. Reopened Monday 7:30 a.m. Their witness signature had happened in a locked room, notarized by an expired commission, documented by a security system that never lies about who was present." The advisor cleared his throat and suggested perhaps there had been some administrative confusion. But confusion does not explain intentional misconduct, and intent was what the evidence was teaching. Then came Sarah's statement. 3 pages of careful penmanship that turned their family care narrative into a timeline of calculated manipulation. Liquidate quietly. No delays. Heard on a recorded conference call. Tuesday afternoon before the signature event, their attorney's face registered the shift from defense to damage control, while the advisor's smile finally learned that some edges cannot be smoothed. I sat quietly through their explanations about grief and complexity and misunderstanding. Because explanations sound different when they argue with timestamps and recorded statements. Their story wanted sympathy. The evidence wanted accountability. By the meeting's end, their leather portfolios had closed without flourish, and the advisor recommended indefinite postponement of any property transactions pending internal review. He used phrases like reputational considerations and procedural clarity, language that meant my signature was no longer part of their timeline, and their timeline no longer belonged to them. They filed out with the careful politeness of people who had learned the difference between temporary setbacks and permanent consequences. I remained seated until the room emptied. Then thanked Daniel for the education in how paper fights battles that voices cannot win. The next morning would bring their attorney's withdrawal letter, and the morning after that would bring silence. The expensive kind that follows when strategy meets evidence and decides to take different paths. The letter arrived on letterhead so crisp it could have cut paper, bearing the measured language of attorneys who had learned the difference between confidence and evidence. Upon further review of the procedural complexities surrounding the property transfer, it read, "Our clients have determined that a temporary suspension of all related activities would serve the family's broader interests." They used words like administrative review and clarification period, but what they meant was retreat, the expensive kind that comes with billable hours and reputational mathematics. Their timeline had tried to rush probate. Probate had taught them the price of impatience. Daniel read the letter aloud over coffee, his voice carrying the satisfaction of someone who had watched paper win arguments that shouting could not. They want to withdraw the quitclaim filing, acknowledge your life's estate provisions, and request a mutual understanding regarding future property discussions. He folded the letter and slid it across the table. Translation: they're offering not to fight what they can't win. Their attorney's language wore a suit, but underneath it was a white flag, and white flags do not negotiate from positions of strength. Justice had worn a business suit and carried a briefcase. Their fraud had worn weekend clothes and met a judge on Monday. I walked through the house that afternoon and noted the things that had changed without permission. The basement lock removed. My books returned to shelves. The utility statement back in my name with a customer service note apologizing for the clerical error. They had begun undoing their erasure with the same efficiency they had used to create it. Because efficiency travels both directions when it meets accountability. The court order remained in effect until the hearing. But their withdrawal made the hearing a formality, like closing a door on a room that had already been emptied. Silence had returned to the house. But this time it belonged to me. Daniel prepared a response that matched their politeness while protecting my position. We would accept their withdrawal, acknowledge their administrative confusion, and agree not to pursue damages in exchange for a notarized statement, recognizing my homestead rights and life estate protections. The statement would be recorded with the county, creating a paper trail that no future family meetings could edit. They wanted forgiveness. I wanted documentation, and documentation lasted longer than apologies. The court would stamp our agreement, and the stamp would remember what voices might forget. By Friday, the notarized acknowledgments had been signed and filed. My name restored to the chain of title where it belonged. They had discovered the cost of forgery was higher than the price of honesty. And honesty was what would govern future conversations about the house. Their plans had tried to write me out of the story. The county recorder had written me back in with interest and court supervision. The basement door stayed unlocked now, not because they had learned generosity, but because locks require legal justification, and they had run out of justifications that would survive. Discovery. I kept the court file in the kitchen drawer next to the deed, not as a trophy, but as a reminder that paper keeps promises longer than people do. They had wanted my signature on their timeline. Instead, they got the judge's signature on mine, and judicial signatures carry more weight in rooms where money talks. The next morning brought ordinary quiet, the kind that arrives when justice has finished its paperwork and gone home for the day. 3 months later, I stood in the county recorder's office and asked for copies on heavy paper. The kind that holds ink like memory holds meaning. The clerk smiled as she pulled my deed from the file. The same instrument number that had traveled through discovery and depositions to arrive back where it belonged. In my name with annotations that told the story of its brief adventure through attempted fraud. I placed the copies in a folder marked House Story and tucked a photograph inside. Patrick and me on the front steps the day we first turned the key, laughing because the locksmith had given us 3 different keys and none of them fit. We learned that day that homes choose their people as much as people choose their homes. And some choices survive every attempt to edit them. The foundation of our marriage had been partnership, not possession. And that partnership lived now in the deed and the life estate memo and the court file that documented how truth travels when it needs to defend itself. I drove home slowly, windows down, listening to the city wake up around me while the papers rested in the passenger seat like a sleeping cat, content and unworried. The house appeared through the trees, yellow siding and white trim, looking exactly like a place where 2 people had decided to build a life and succeeded. Despite late arriving evidence to the contrary, the maple tree Patrick planted had grown tall enough to shade the kitchen window, just as he predicted it would, inside. I made tea in the pot we had received as a wedding gift and carried it to the kitchen table, where morning light made squares on the wood grain. The court order had expired. The agreements were final. The players had found new stages for their ambitions. But the quiet that filled the rooms was not the absence of conflict. It was the presence of resolution, the kind that comes when justice wears work clothes and carries a briefcase instead of a sword. I opened the House Story folder and read the index number aloud. The way one reads a prayer that has been answered by bureaucracy and stamped by a judge who understood that homes are not commodities, but histories. And histories deserve careful custodians. The telephone rang once. Daniel calling to report that the final recording had been completed and my homestead protection was now a matter of public record. Anyone who searches the title will see your rights are protected, he said. And the fraud attempt is noted for future reference. I thanked him for teaching me that paper could fight battles. I didn't have to fight alone. And that sometimes the best revenge is the kind that comes with official seals and gets filed in alphabetical order. He chuckled and said justice had always been a filing system, and we had just reminded my family how to use the index. After hanging up, I walked to the front window and looked out at the street where neighbors passed walking dogs and pushing strollers. Ordinary people living ordinary days in the kind of neighborhood where deeds matter and documents tell the truth about who belongs where. I chose to donate a small grant to the community garden in Patrick's name. Not for forgiveness or closure, but for continuity. Because gardens grow best when they're tended by people who understand the difference between ownership and stewardship. The bench I ordered would face east to catch morning light, with a simple plaque that read Patrick Morrison he planted for tomorrow. That afternoon, I hung the deed's certified copy in the hallway where family photos used to live, not as a trophy or a threat, but as a reminder that some stories get written in ink and some get written in law. And the ones written in law tend to last longer than the ones written in wishful thinking. The basement door stood open now, not because anyone had unlocked it, but because locks require reasons and all their reasons had been notarized away. That evening, I brewed a second cup of tea and sat in the garden Patrick had sketched on graph paper 20 years earlier, watching the light fade through leaves he had chosen for their color in autumn. The deed rested in the kitchen drawer next to the silverware, a quiet neighbor to the daily tools of living. No longer a weapon or a shield, but simply a document that said this place belonged to these people, and these people had belonged to each other. And some belongings survive the paperwork, and some paperwork survives the belonging. The phone did not ring with threats or apologies or explanations. The mail brought utility bills in my name and catalogs addressed to people who lived here and planned to stay. And in the growing darkness, I felt no need to lock any doors, because the most important boundaries were already drawn in ink and filed where they could not be erased by ambition or edited by convenience. if this story carries an echo of your own moments when you had to choose between silence and evidence, between erasure and documentation, know that the choice is always yours to make. And making it quietly does not make it smaller. Sometimes the most powerful victories are the ones that get filed in manila folders and remembered by clerks who keep careful records. Thank you for walking this path with me. From locked door to open window, from erasure to archive, from their timeline to my truth.